I moved in with my sister and her husband, but his behavior became controlling and inappropriate, peaking when I mentioned I was dating someone. I'm Ashley, 17F. My sister Jess, 25F, and her husband Jake, 34M, have been married for 2 years. They met when she first started college and have been together ever since. As far as I know, they've never had an issue, and whenever they came around to visit, they appeared to have the perfect connection. My parents never really made the best decisions in life, so my sister practically raised me herself. I'm quite grateful to her for this, and I know she had to make numerous sacrifices to be able to do so. When she was in college, I called her at least 3 times a week to check in and see how she was doing. She'd chat about school, job, and her plans. Then she'd talk about Jake. She described him so well that it raised my own expectations of love. For example, she'd tell me about all the flowers she received, the lovely dates she went on, and how he treated her so well. After living with my parents, who should have divorced a long time ago, I didn't have a clear idea of what a good partnership looked like. So I became fairly close to Jess and Jake. Growing up, my sister and I were always together. So, when Mother introduced me to Jake, it felt like I had finally found an elder brother. Jess and Jake eventually moved in together, became engaged, and are now married. My parents kicked me out because I refused to pay the rent. I work at a luxury horse ranch, and there are a few perks. They'll let you practice on their horses, they give free lessons with a riding instructor, and overall, I just adore my job. I did not want to leave it. However, my pay isn't great, and for the amount my parents were asking for, I'd have to have a second job, or quit, to find one that pays well. So I found myself living with Jess and Jake. Jake works from home, so unless he's out with Jess or at the gym, he's at home. He makes enough money doing whatever he does. I'm not sure what he does, but Jess told me it's his family's firm, so that explains it. Recently, they approached me and informed me that they were expecting. Obviously, I was really excited for them, but my sister had a few miscarriages in the past, so we had to be extra cautious with her. Even in its early stages, my sister's pregnancy has proven to be extremely difficult, making it high risk. Hopefully, this is enough to give you a good picture of what's happening. My parents had an old automobile that I was allowed to drive to job and school, but once I was kicked out, I couldn't use it. This was disappointing because I had always enjoyed the independence that having a car provided. But whatever, I'll get over it. Jake insisted on taking me to school in the morning and then driving me to and from work. I was incredibly glad for this because it saved me from having to take the bus or walk. Jake would return home from the gym, shower, grab me a Starbucks, and drop me off at school. In the afternoon, he would pick me up at school and drive me to work. Jake was generally waiting outside or on his way by the conclusion of my shift. It was a huge assistance, and I was grateful that he took so much time out of his day to assist me. In the drive, we'd wind up conversing and having chats about Jess or the baby's plans. But he was often asking if I was dating or had a crush on somebody. He'd wink and say things like, "You're so stunning, it's impossible. There must be something you're hiding from me. Come on, tell me. You know I can keep a secret, so tell me." I mean, there was a guy, I will give him that, but it was too early to discuss. This resulted in my being unclear because I didn't want to lie to him. I'd basically just play coy and avoid answering any of his queries with too detailed an answer, as I didn't want to jinx myself. Finally, Alex, 19 million, the boy I was talking to, asked me out on a date. His family owned the ranch where I worked, so we spent a lot of time together while I was at work. Usually, during my shifts, he would come and assist me, or we'd go riding together. I was quite excited, and on my way home from work, I told Jake about it. He suddenly became cold. I'm not sure how else to explain it, but the familial warmth was gone. He began asking a lot of questions, very matter-of-factly, and I responded because I assumed it was just the protective older sibling thing. I figured he'd need some time to adjust. But when I informed him that Alex and I had been chatting for about a month, he freaked out and became very upset. I burst into tears as he began calling me a liar and accusing me of concealing this information from him. The fact that he literally said, "What about us?" has stuck with me ever since. That has left me completely perplexed because, what does he even mean? The worst part is that, because of how he acted, I'm overthinking everything that has happened since I moved in with them. Jake's house had a pool in the backyard, and I used to go there to swim or just lie out and tan. However, I've realized that whenever I went for a swim or tried to sunbathe, Jake would find an excuse to come and do anything outside. He'd fire up the grill, mow the lawn, or do anything else around the yard. I would have the impression that I was being observed. He even started swimming with me a few times, but I assumed he was simply trying to get in shape like me. After I came out of the pool, I'd go take a shower in the corridor. Jake and Jess have their own bathroom, which is connected to the master bedroom. After I finished my shower, I went to my room, changed, and went to bed. Jake would sometimes wait for me in the little space between the corridor and my room, even if I was only wearing a towel. He would say, "Good night," and I would respond. But now I'm wondering whether there was another motive behind it. I don't want to bring these worries up with my sister because she's been so delicate lately. This pregnancy is definitely hitting her hard, and I don't want to say anything because it could harm her or the kid. I just want to know if I'm overthinking things. More information. I didn't even contemplate the possibility that my sister would support him over mine. But after reading everything in the comments, I think I should start gathering evidence. Also, I will do my best to change the relationship between him and me without raising red flags. I'm more than prepared to inform my sister if I believe there is an urgent danger, but as I previously stated, I don't believe he is the type of guy who poses an actual concern. To be cautious, I'd rather wait till she's feeling better before trying to break the news to her. I want to be cautious since my sister could be gravely hurt, not just emotionally, but also due to pregnancy dangers. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the way he flew off the handle was terrifying. I believe he's simply been under too much stress. My sister's pregnancy is actually high risk, so he's had to care for her far more than usual. He's probably just afraid about what will happen to her. However, even if I give him the benefit of the doubt, I should set certain boundaries. When he had that outburst, it truly worried me, and I felt unsafe. I know I'll never be able to physically overcome him, so I'm going to ask a few of my friends if they'd want to carpool with me. I will also contact Alex to see if he can give me a lift to and from work. Worst case scenario, I'll locate a job I can walk to. In the meantime, I'll absolutely strive to highlight my brotherly relationship with him. I'm going to be friendly since I don't feel compelled to be nasty or create an aggressive environment. Aside from that, I'll take steps to see if I can improve my circumstances. Is my sister's spouse acting strangely, or am I overthinking? First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who left a comment on my last post with suggestions. After reading all of the comments last night, I recognize that I am no longer secure in this environment and will make changes starting today. As much as I admire and love Jake, I don't believe the danger is worthwhile. I attempted to establish a conversation with him after posting and received some suggestions, simply to see if we could discuss this. But he was still in a nasty attitude, so I simply walked to my room. In the middle of the night, I felt the need to leave the house. I was feeling imprisoned, so I decided to take a trip to my usual smoking area to clear my mind. I wasn't even there for 15 minutes before Jake texted me, "Where are you?" Then my phone started blowing up. He kept calling. I'm not sure how to convey my fear. I just wanted to be left alone. I eventually took up the phone, which resulted in a storm of insults. Apparently, I am a effing princess who always gets her way, and deserve to be treated like the expletive I am. Then he told me to provide him my location, which was definitely not going to happen. I encouraged him to take a pause and reflect on what he had just said to me. After that, I contacted Alex, who happily answered, and I told everything to him. I'm not sure how much he comprehended at first, given that I was practically shaking and crying so hard. However, he ended up going over to my location and asking a few more questions about the scenario while attempting to calm me down. I was finally able to relax and tell him everything again, this time with a clearer mind. Throughout this, my phone was constantly ringing. Assuming it was Jake, I just let the calls continue. Eventually, I realized it was my sister's phone calling me. Despite the fact that I knew Jake may be on the other end, I answered the phone. Jake was the one who hurled another barrage of invective at me, loud enough for Alex to hear. Alex took the phone from my hand, ordered Jake to shut the fussing up, and that I was safe, and then hung up. After that, Alex assured me that everything would be fine and that I need not worry. He ended up taking me all the way to the ranch and informing his folks about what had transpired and my new circumstances. I'm grateful that they decided to take me in and let me stay in one of their spare rooms in exchange for a little additional work on the farm. After that, I cuddled with Alex and attempted to fall asleep. I ended up not going to school today since I needed to relax. However, after Jake's reaction and the comments I'd been reading entered my mind, I became quite concerned about my sister. I ended up contacting her and happily she answered. It was clear she had been crying. She inquired if I was safe and okay. Jess told me that the night before, she awoke to Jake yelling, which shocked her. She claimed to be still sleeping. She ended up hearing him return to their room and grab her phone off the charger. After that, she heard him ranting again and the front door slamming. Jake had apparently gone out to seek for me, carrying my sister's phone with him. She stated she had no idea what to do and was afraid he might actually hurt me. After approximately an hour, Jake returned home. He was clearly still in a terrible mood, because when she questioned where he had been and what had happened, he blew up at her for questioning him. She said she'd never seen him so angry before. He was literally destroying stuff. After a few minutes, he returned to his car and drove away, but fortunately, he left her phone on the counter. She checked the phone logs and saw every call he had made to me. While Jake was gone, she called a friend to pick her up and then tried to contact me. I was sleeping at the time, but she told me she was afraid Jake had discovered me. She apologized for not being able to protect me and for failing to notice what was happening. Jess wondered why I hadn't told her about Jake's actions. I emphasized that I did not want to worry her out about the pregnancy. We both ended up crying for a long time. Apparently, my parents are allowing her to return home rent-free since they want to help raise their grandchild. If this had been an option in the beginning, none of this would have occurred, but I digress. My sister and I ended up going out to dinner, and I showed her my post. We cried again. She said she had never been afraid of Jake before, but after witnessing his rage the night before, she was terrified. We both still need to go back to the house to grab our things. We'll contact you eventually and set a day to transfer everything out. My father and Alex will also be present, just in case Jake tries anything. According to my sister, Jake has tried to reach out and apologize numerous times, claiming that he was only concerned about my safety and that I shouldn't be out at night. He didn't realize she could hear exactly what he was yelling at me, so she knows he's lying. Jess informed Jake that she would be filing for divorce, and then hung up. I love my sister and wish her the best in life. I am confident she will heal from this and meet an incredible partner who loves her and only her. In other news, Alex and I are going on a date next week, which makes me quite happy. But, seriously, thank you to the Reddit commentators for making me so stressed out that I wanted to take a smoke break. I believe you may have saved me. I'm not sure what would have happened if I'd stayed in my room that night, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Now to the next story, story 2. I was uninvited from a planned vacation with my boyfriend and his best friend. She threatened to cancel if I did. Original post. My boyfriend wanted to go on a vacation this summer to his mom's friend's house in Hawaii with me and his 2 best friends, 25 male and 29 female. We had been planning on this all spring, and at some point, 25 male dropped out of the trip, leaving just the 3 of us. For context, my boyfriend and I have been going out since November, and it's been serious. We had, and still have, been talking about moving in together, and he has said, and I agree, that this is a long-term situation and that we are in it for good. In early June, once 25 male unexpectedly dropped out of the trip, 29 female called my boyfriend and told him that now that it was just the 3 of us, she didn't feel comfortable with me going on the trip, since she didn't know me that well and she didn't want to be a third wheel. She said that if I were to go, she wouldn't go on the trip. Without telling me that this was happening, they changed the plans and made it a trip just the 2 of them, and they changed the location to a beach in Costa Rica. I was trying to figure out when to ask for time off this summer and hadn't heard news about the plans, so I asked my boyfriend which week in August I should be setting aside for the Hawaii trip. He let me know that, actually, he had talked to his friend and that she didn't want to go if I were going, so he was going to go alone with her to Costa Rica. He said that we could go another week later, maybe to Mexico City or something. I was upset, and tried to talk with him about how the situation made me feel, especially since this wasn't a case of a separate trip being set up ahead of time. This was a case of me being invited and then uninvited from a week-long tropical vacation with a girlfriend of his who I had never met before. We eventually decided to do a trip together to Copenhagen, which we have both wanted to visit, as some sort of compensation. I also asked to meet her, so that I could feel more comfortable with the trip. We spent the 4th of July going to see her and her boyfriend in the city where they live, and although it was nice to put a face to a name, it was ultimately a very cold trip and she was not at all welcoming to me. My boyfriend remarked on how unfriendly she was. To both of us, he thought. And said that he was surprised that she didn't act warmly to me. I went out of my way to try to get to know her and her boyfriend. I'm very outgoing and friendly and usually this would be easy. But it didn't really click, even after several days. They were somewhat cold to each other as well. They bickered a little bit about their future and his own 3-week trip without her that was scheduled for the same time as their trip. This had been scheduled before ours had. This had been my effort to feel better about the trip, so I told my boyfriend that I still didn't feel comfortable with things, and that I was feeling insulted by the way that it was handled. I had tried to make things smooth between all of us, and I asked him to please come up with something that could help me feel better about the trip. On a visit to his family, they asked about the trip and they were all shocked that he would have arranged it this way, and let me know that they would have been furious if they were in my position, which triggered a fight in which I asked him to please help come up with a strategy to make me feel better and more secure about them going together without me. He said that he would never do this kind of thing again, which feels like not much to offer, since this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime trip to begin with. He kind of offered to not go on the trip, but he had already paid for the tickets and made arrangements, and I didn't want to stop their trip and be resented by both him and his best friend. He asked me to give him ideas of how to make me feel better and wanted me to just tell him what to do and stalled until it was finally the day of the trip. He bought me a bag of peanut butter cups and I drove the two of them to the airport. I feel so disregarded and disrespected in this situation. I want to break up with him, but I don't want to burn up something that has otherwise been really good. Too long, didn't read. I, 28 female, was uninvited from a vacation with my boyfriend, 29 male, and his best friend, 29 female, and I can't get over it. I want advice on how to talk with him about this. Update 1. I was really upset the day I dropped him off and he was texting me but I wasn't responding. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do anything at all in the state I was in. I waited until the next day, and then I sent him a thought-out text letting him know that I didn't feel safe or loved in the way the trip was handled and that I would be dropping his things off at his place and leaving his keys with the neighbor. He called but didn't leave any messages, and then he messaged me that he didn't understand. The rest of the week, he called and messaged me, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up or text back. On Thursday, I think that he realized that I was serious, and he asked me some questions about logistical things. I told him which neighbor his key was with, etc. When he got back and saw all his things at his place, he got pretty frantic and called and left me a long message. I was working all day, but also I still didn't want to respond. He asked me to explain because he didn't understand what was going on. The next day, I sent another text making it clear that it was over, and he got upset and sent me a bunch of texts in a row about how he didn't understand why I was throwing away everything that we built. He left me a voicemail that was really angry that said he had no idea why I was upset and that he did not accept the breakup because he had no say in it and that he wanted me to tell him the evil story that I had made up about him to his face. I wasn't going to respond to him and I wanted to remain calm, but this upset me. So I sat down to write him this letter. It's long, so skip over if you want. I tried to call him but I started crying and told him I'd just send him an email instead. This is what it said. The time that we have had apart has given me some good space and time to think. I have had a chance to think about the things that are important for me in a relationship and I see that we should not be together. I am sorry that I have been asking for you to change things about your life that you shouldn't have to change at my or anyone's behest. From the very start, this trip was made in an insanely disrespectful way in which it started out from you being given an ultimatum by your female best friend who I had never met that either she goes or I go on this trip, and you picked her. You didn't offer to have her meet me. Theoretically I was your long-term partner, so this would have made a lot of sense. You didn't encourage her to find someone else to come, and you didn't consult me at all. That's enough for most people to have a deal breaker, right there. However, I stayed. This is a person who you have a history with that is not entirely clear to me. Here is what I understand. Some bad rumors got started about the two of you in which you spent an entire night out with her on an acid trip while you were dating someone else. Nothing happened. The other thing I understand is that you were interested in her romantically at some, theoretically other point and that she started dating her boyfriend and that closed the door on things for you. According to what I also understand, it took a long time for 29F's boyfriend to feel comfortable with you being around, but you apparently worked to ultimately make him feel comfortable with you after I'm not sure how long. This is the completely unknown person who shut me out of a trip that I was originally going to go on. Unilateral decision. You did not tell me this was happening until I asked when the trip to Hawaii would be. You purchased tickets in another very disrespectful situation in which I have cooked dinner and have guests present, and you choose to go into my room for well over an hour to select tickets with her, and in which I repeatedly ask you to please come to dinner because you say it will just be a few more minutes each time. There is absolutely no reason for doing it at that time and in that situation, seeing as how she is in the same time zone as us and has a 9-to-5 job. This makes me feel sick to my stomach. So, to make myself feel better about this whole arrangement, I tell you that I want to meet this person. On my request, we arranged a trip to go meet her and her boyfriend, a brief trip in which they are, and you explicitly agree, inexplicably cold. The first conversation that we have is one in which 29 female and her boyfriend argue about how she dumped him while he was already in a relationship and got him to date her instead. You tell me about conversations that 29 female has had with you recently in which it seems implied that there is some real instability in their long-term relationship. Stuff about kids and dogs. I have a discussion in which I let you know that I see that and that it worries me. Meanwhile, I am still wanting all of this to work out for you and for me and for her. I, at this point, am planning on being with you for the long term and see no benefit in telling you to not go on a trip with your best friend. I want it to work out. But each and every interaction surrounding this trip chips and chips away at my ability to handle it, the conversations that seem to go nowhere, etc. Your dad, your mom, and your grandparents are all very surprised when we tell them about this trip. It is becoming very obvious that this is a dangerous trip to make with the fragility of our relationship. 29 million, we had only been together for 9 months. How long did it take before 29 female's boyfriend was comfortable with you hanging around? Much less going on a one-on-one international tropical vacation in which he was uninvited because of your request. We go over it with, friend, at the rock climbing gym, we go over it in the car, we go over it while we're booking our Airbnb for Copenhagen, we go over it when I tell you that I still feel uncomfortable and I do not feel good about the trip. Talk about repeatedly saying something. Although I ask for you to help me, you actually ask me instead to come up with what would make me feel better. Surprisingly, I have no ideas either. Ultimately, it appears that the original plan to meet at my place and hang out and do a game night before you two go on the trip has been cancelled, and 29F will be staying at my place, but not hanging out with us at all beforehand. You attribute it to you not bringing it up with her early enough. This is apparently not something that was discussed even 2 nights before the trip. This upsets me. You do not know what to do. I don't blame you. At this point, it was well out of hand. I don't know what to do either. There is no good solution that I can think of besides waiting for the trip to be over. I tell you that either I have to get over it, or I have to break up with you, and that I don't want to break up with you. But my ability to get over it is rather worn down. She arrives at my place very late, and we wake up the next morning for me to take the 2 of you to the airport. After all of this lead up, I know that you can tell how unhappy I am. I fully absolutely know you can tell how unhappy I am. You leave, and when I don't respond to your text messages, you text me to tell me that you hope I'm okay and you're going to bed. No call. The rest of the week was rough. My text to you was met with, essentially, I'm sorry you feel this way. You tell me that I'm being unfair. There is no acknowledgement, and there still has been none, that this trip to a fucking honeymoon destination, as we have discussed before, could be a crazy and horrible thing to go through with, even with my quasi-blessing. This is not something that people in relationships have to deal with. This is not something that people in relationships do, besides 29 female, I guess. In the end, all of this is to say that I have felt serious emotional needs go seriously unmet in a way that is a deal breaker for me. There have been some wonderful, very positive times, but there has been an unnecessary amount of heartache and suffering for me over things that come down to what I can only assume are personal differences. I cannot handle your relationship with a 29 female. And I suppose I could ask you to pick between her and me, but that's not what I want to do. I want you to have your best friend, and I want to leave. I did love you, but I am not about to fight this fight and hear you tell me that I'm crazy for not seeing how totally platonic everything is for the rest of my life. It seems like trying to convince someone to like different food, or to have a different favorite color. I am not happy about this, and I do not want to feel these feelings any longer. There is no need for this to be mutual. I do not need your permission to break up with you. He wrote me back an apologetic email in which he accepted responsibility for most things without any argument, except he denied anything that had to do with his relationship with her making me feel uncomfortable, and he denied that I would not be able to handle their relationship. He said that the only thing that made their trip bad for me was my own perspective. I wrote him back that trust has to be built and that he put too much strain too early on a relationship in which we had not developed that trust. He agreed and apologized. For me, it ended on a pretty amicable note. But this style of relationship really doesn't work for me, and I don't feel like his responses to me really healed or changed anything significantly. I stand by my decision at this point. Too long didn't read. We broke up. Reminder, I am not the original poster. Now to the next story, story 3. My parents humiliated me at my sister's graduation. They joked that I was a mistake compared to my perfect sister, so I shocked them by this. At my sister's graduation, I felt absolutely ashamed of my own parents. They denigrated me in front of everyone, even our closest friends and relatives. This was supposed to be only about Elena, my older sister. She was excited to start her new path because she had recently graduated from college and secured an amazing job. When my parents stood up to speak in her honor, I expected them to make appropriate remarks. She has worked hard to reach this milestone and deserves every bit of credit. I was not surprised when, during their address, they included Elena as one of the greatest blessings. I was old enough by then to recognize that my parents adored Elena more than they loved me. She had always been the more gifted daughter, and my parents would constantly compare me to her. Then my parents began to joke in their speech about how they should have stopped having children after Elena. They argued that second-borns are usually useless. They said that if they only had Elena in their lives, They could have spent more time and effort on her instead of me. Hearing them say such awful things openly and casually while I was sitting right there stunned me. I searched the room, hoping that someone, anybody, would notice how disturbing their statements were, but all I saw were the faces of my relatives laughing along, as if this horrible simile were simply light entertainment. Though my parents had often made me feel inferior and useless, this was the first time they had done it openly, leaving no room for me to hide from the fact. In their opinion, I simply lacked in comparison to their beautiful daughter Elena. This was not an isolated incident or moment of poor judgment. It reinforced what I had long suspected. I was considered a distant afterglow, whereas my older sister would always be the daughter they adored. Growing up as the second child, I became accustomed to our household's implied preference. It constantly crept into their speech, conduct, and routines. My parents frequently forgot to wish me a happy birthday, and on more than one occasion, they were on business travels, leaving me alone. They would never miss Elena's moment. Every year, without fail, both of my parents would be there, planning a spectacular event and ensuring Mom felt honored. Seeing how they showered her with love on her special day taught me early on to manage my expectations and accept that my birthday was not that important to them. As an opinionated youngster, my parents regularly informed me that I was disruptive or unpleasant just because of who I was. I was labeled problematic because I did not fit the quiet, restrained mold they appeared to like, and I was punished for something as simple as being too chatty or honest in expressing my interests. Elena's calm temperament and introverted tendencies, on the other hand, were constantly lauded. In our family, she was regarded as the ideal daughter, as she was mature and polite. She was thus the one who was displayed and paraded in front of everyone. Over the years, I was the one who received the most criticism. I tried for a while to suit the picture my parents seemed to want. I put in the effort, believing that if I acted better, accomplished more, or followed their plan, they would eventually see me differently. But as I grew older, it became clear that I couldn't simply shape myself into Elena's clone. We were two separate people. I tried so hard, but I couldn't be her. I eventually gave up and attempted to adjust to their constant adulation of her. The way they would brag about her accomplishments to anybody who would listen while dismissing everything I had ever done still hurt terribly. All of those occurrences, as devastating as they were, had at least remained within our household. I was amazed at how casually they exposed everything at the graduation ceremony. All of those incidents, as traumatic as they were, had at least remained within the family. I was astonished by how casually my parents disgraced me during their speech at Elena's graduation. My parents had never embarrassed me in front of others, so they had never shown the rest of the extended family how little respect they had for me. What hurt me even more was that no one in my entire family showed displeasure or told my parents how inappropriate this was. Nobody even glanced sympathetically at me after my parents cracked those jokes at my expense. My parents continued to laud Elena, and their tones conveyed a sense of pride that I had never seen directed at me. Then they brazenly announced that they had bought her a graduation present, a brand new automobile, which she had always wanted to buy. With everyone's attention on Elena, who hugged my parents with love and gratitude, the room erupted in applause, laughter, and clapping. The three of them were really content. I felt like an outsider in my own family. The funny thing is that I've never been envious of Elena. We'd always gotten along well enough, and I believe she deserved whatever good fortune came along. But that speech broke me. The truth is that after that awful speech, I addressed my parents. For years, I had silently endured their favoritism, scorn, and unpleasant words. I took it all in and convinced myself that if I just tried to be strong and calm instead of irritated, things would get better. But that evening, after the speech and their joke in front of everyone, I had reached a breaking point. I was tired of taking everything in and pretending that their comments didn't sting anymore. I thus resolved that I could no longer remain silent. I mustered the courage to speak up, hoping that my parents would see how deeply their acts had hurt me. I wanted them to at least show that they cared enough to listen to me. I wanted them to recognize the misery they had caused over the years and accept the embarrassment I felt at the moment. If I told them how I felt, I figured they'd regret what they said, or at least feel awful about making me appear so little. When I eventually confronted them, I received a cold, scornful response. They paid little attention to my words. Rather than offering sorrow or an apology, they told me I was exaggerating, as if years of being ignored and denigrated could be so easily dismissed. They acted as if I had no right to be furious with them, or as if my feelings did not matter. My father went so far as to remark that he had nothing to be proud of when it came to me, and that I should not hold it against them if they were disappointed with who I was. I recall how casually he stated it, as if my presence did not matter to him. My mother, on the other hand, told me to stop overreacting and pointed out that I was being overly needy by being upset over something so insignificant. It felt as if my parents were saying I hadn't earned the basic respect of being their child because I hadn't done enough, that I was somehow less deserving of their pride or care than Elena simply because I wasn't her. The matter even resurfaced to Elena, who defended my parents and obviously demanded that I be less harsh with them. She said something that truly hit home and I'll never forget. I shouldn't have been so outraged by their graduation speech because it was merely a harmless jest. Elena assured me that if I had studied and worked hard like she did, I could make them proud as well. Among all the words, those that struck the most deeply. It was dreadful to learn I hadn't worked hard enough to earn their respect. She made it sound so simple, as if all the years of effort I had put in were invisible to her, as if my difficulties and attempts to get a job had no bearing. As the older sister, I expected her to protect me in some way, but she didn't. That seemed like betrayal coming from her. Looking back, that conversation turned things around. I realized then that I had left my family behind. Done trying to win their approval, done clarifying for them, and done hoping for something that would never come, love or affirmation. I put all of my work into making something for myself. Starting that day, I immersed myself in my studies, focusing on the things I could influence and create my destiny. 2 years later, all of my hard work paid off when I was accepted on a full scholarship to my dream institution. This was a personal accomplishment for me. This was entirely my own accomplishment, the result of my dedication, determination, and refusal to let my family's neglect define me. After achieving that goal, it appeared, for the first time, that I had done something quite personal. When I gave my parents the news, they were almost as astonished as if they had never expected me to attend college in the first place, never alone on a scholarship. Elena scrutinized my admission letter twice, as if she didn't believe I was capable of doing things on my own. Clearly, they had all underestimated me, and watching their surprise made me slightly thrilled. I simply shook my head at her remark, but my mother then turned my mood sour by saying that it was a good thing I had received a full scholarship because they hadn't set aside any college funds for me anyhow. My parents had no issue paying Elena's tuition, despite their lack of foresight in saving for me. When it was time to move out, I simply packed my belongings and left the house for my college apartment. That day, I made a determined decision to cut off all contact with Elena and my parents. I felt no need to explain my intentions. They had consistently demonstrated, after all, that my feelings, opinions, and values had little influence on them. Why should I exhaust myself trying to explain something they had shown unable to acknowledge? Since they hadn't even provided an apology that might restore the years of neglect and agony they had caused me, I recognized that arguing with them was pointless. My family contacted me frequently over the next few weeks and months, sending emails and messages in the vague hope that they had reconsidered their actions and had reached out to make amends. I initially felt compelled to open them. However, each message served as a sour reminder of who they were. Their communications were filled with attempts to mislead me into believing I was the one acting erratically. Instead of accepting responsibility for the years of mental pain they had caused, they believed I had overreacted, dismissing my decision to end relationships as immature and impulsive. Their statements consistently returned to the underlying truth. I was the one dissolving the family, so I was wrong to cut them off. I never bothered to respond to any of them. So far, my college experience has been quite positive. I've been able to devote my full attention to my studies, hobbies, and, most importantly, connections with people who love and see me for who I am. Working part-time at a neighboring diner has helped me save for the future. Meeting new people in the diner and talking about their life is interesting. I've cut off contact with my family and immersed myself in my studies, social life, and everything my new surroundings have to offer. By filling my days with important events, I haven't missed them or wondered about how they are doing once. Yesterday, I received an unexpected email from my parents. I found it shocking. They stopped writing to me long ago because I had never answered any of their previous communications. My parents encouraged me in this email to contact them soon away since they had some bad news to tell me. Still, I felt my chest tighten. Despite everything, years of hurt and rejection could not erase the constant feeling that something terrible had occurred. My heart started racing, and all I could think about was the possibility that a family member had been seriously ill or, worse, perished. Despite my resolution to keep them at a distance, fear crept in, my heart hammering as I braced myself for whatever news they were about to bring. I grabbed my phone, unblocked them, and called them immediately back. Elena, who was going through a difficult personal situation, was troubled by the news my parents wanted to share with me. They stated that she had been dealing with drug addiction, which had severely impacted her life. They said that her addiction had gotten so bad that she had lost her job, spent her savings, and was now left with no resources or options. I had no idea Elena was going through anything like this, so the news completely surprised me. She has always been my dependable, high-achieving sibling. However, that same sister became addicted to drugs. I found it tough to believe. Elena's addiction was so unbelievable in my parents' eyes that it shattered their perception of her. Their incredulity, desperation, and, most importantly, their tremendous concern about how this would affect their reputation if others found out shocked me. They hoped I'd have some answers for them as they described everything. Elena had always appeared to be grounded and responsible, so it was startling that she, of all people, had fallen victim to something as dangerous as heroin addiction. My father then asked me, in a mistrustful tone, "You didn't introduce her to drugs back then, did you?" The ramifications surprised me. Not only was the idea completely absurd, but it was also very disgusting to think they may assume I had anything to do with Elena's troubles, much alone anything as serious as introducing her to drugs. How could I bring drugs to my older sister? I mean, I never do drugs myself. Furthermore, I hadn't spoken with Elena or the rest of my family in years due to their mistreatment of me. Having been removed from their life, I had focused on carving my own path away from their toxicity. In the face of their immaculate image of Elena breaking, they were quick to point fingers at someone else, and I was clearly the easiest target. I advised them to speak with Elena before making any assumptions, and I told them that they were unwise to even suspect me. Throughout our conversation, I noticed that my parents were more concerned with the shame that would befall the family if Elena's admissions were public, rather than expressing concern for her. My mother appeared fascinated with her immaculate daughter's clandestine actions. She kept talking about how unexpected it was to discover this aspect of herself and how others would respond if they ever found out. Elena and Dad were overwhelmed and unprepared to deal with the situation, so my mother begged me to return home so I could assist them in caring for Elena. My mother implored me, "I mean, what do we even do? I feel so ashamed of her, so maybe you can talk to her for us," as if this were a legitimate demand to make after years of not communicating. "I can't help Elena. She needs professional help," I stated bluntly. I emphasized that if they truly cared about her well-being and wanted to help her recover, the finest and most compassionate thing they could do was to admit her to a treatment facility where trained specialists could assist her. But my father immediately rejected the idea of sending her to rehab, nearly trembling at the thought of their family's good name being tarnished by her admission to a treatment center. He was obsessed with the possibility of their reputation being harmed by sending her to such a location. He claimed it would only assist to damage their reputation. The thought of people knowing that their only accomplished daughter had a sickness as serious as heroin addiction horrified him. My father chided me for even considering this option, as if openly admitting her addiction was more shameful, and as if constant surveillance would magically fix the problem. Dad insisted that I return home, and that the three of us work together to care for Elena, putting her under constant observation to prevent a relapse. He kept saying how much they wanted Elena to feel better and get back to her normal life as soon as possible. Their perspective was that everything would return to normal as long as no one else knew. They wanted me to take part in a charade, pretending everything was okay while keeping her issues hidden from everyone else. I got outraged and incredulous as I listened. Why were my parents so concerned with what others thought about them and their reputation? Here was an opportunity for my parents to truly stand up, to demonstrate that they could prioritize their daughter's needs over appearances and transform her life. My sister was plainly suffering from something serious, yet they still struggled to do the proper thing. These people had not altered all that much, obviously. On top of that, they were now attempting to entice me back in, urging me to maintain this family front by assisting them in caring for the sister they frequently likened me to. I claimed I needed some time to think about things. I can't just walk away. After all, I have classes and a job to consider. My parents insisted that I take at least 2 or 3 weeks off to help them because they really needed me right now. About everything, I'm torn. Part of me wants to see what I can do for Elena to make sure she's okay. Another side of me is selfish, allowing my parents to manage their golden child fully on their own. I'm not sure I can be of much help because they are more concerned with saving face than with addressing the root of the problem. Even today, I wonder if I should refuse to return home and care for my drug-addicted sister. Update 1. This story didn't appear like it was going to explode. It is taking some time to look through the hundreds of comments I have received. I wanted to clear up a few things. I don't hate Elena. Actually, I want to help her and genuinely care about her. However, because I have not spoken with my family in 3 years, I have experienced a level of serenity and stability that I did not have previously. I am concerned that reconnecting with Elena may allow my parents to re-enter my life as well. I honestly do not know for sure. If you're wondering, Elena could have been fighting with heroin addiction for years, possibly even before my parents discovered it. Clearly, Elena, the golden child, was praised and kept as the ideal daughter, frequently under intense pressure to maintain that image. This form of pedestal minimizes susceptibility and failure. Any failure, no matter how little, could have been devastating. If Elena believed her worth was solely determined by her accomplishments and how others perceived her, drugs could have developed over time as a coping mechanism for escaping the weight of those expectations or the fear of disappointing our parents. I become even more depressed when I think about my sister, who may have been suffering silently all along without my knowledge. She should have felt comfortable being honest with me earlier, before things got to this point. I would have wanted to be there for her, to help her get through it. It just makes me feel powerless. If only I had known about this significant part of her life and could have helped her. My parents expected the best of me and my sister from an early age because they are both high achievers. Personally, I need some time to analyze everything. I will notify you if anything further develops. Update 2. After considerable internal thought and encouragement from some of the comments I read, I decided to contact Elena. She is my sister, despite everything. As a result, I believed it was critical to hear from her directly rather than basing my decisions on my parents' interpretations of events. First, I texted her a short note asking if she wanted to chat. She responded some hours later, but only agreed to a phone call. When I finally spoke with her, the voice on the other end of the telephone seemed like a shadow of the sister I knew. Elena's tone was obviously weighted, softer, and more careful. She slowly revealed what she was going through. Elena stated that she had fought with addiction for several years. It began shortly after college, when she began working for her law business. She struggled to maintain that status at work by continually working harder than others to impress her supervisor in the hopes of receiving more credit or a promotion. She began to feel burned out after being the perfect, highly talented daughter for so long. Elena felt she couldn't stop, slow down, or get treatment because she had to live up to the expectations everyone had for her. When stress got unbearable, a friend recommended using recreational drugs to unwind. Before she knew it, what began as intermittent use had become into reliance. Elena also stated that she felt imprisoned for the longest time. She couldn't tell her parents she was struggling since she knew how they would react. She felt alone due to their obsessive attention to appearances and denial of anything that contradicted their narrative. She maintained the facade, acting as if everything was fine, even as she began to lose control. She couldn't hide the fact any longer, so she spiraled, lost her job, and depleted her savings. She wondered whether I was criticizing her as harshly as she was analyzing herself, and she expressed her embarrassment for even discussing this with me. It hurt my heart to hear her story. I'd never realized that the platform our parents had set her on was a prison rather than a privilege. She had been bearing the suffocating weight of being their golden child, whereas I had been dealing with the pain of being overlooked. Our parents' focus on control and favoritism had harmed each of us in different ways. There was no way I would have judged her. As a result, I expressed my regret that she had not communicated her feelings with me. My only regret is that I was not with her. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Now, on to the next story, Story 4. My rich mother-in-law, Karen, has treated me like a maid for many years. Now, I have stopped tolerating and prepared a perfect plan for revenge on her. Alex's words cut through the clatter of dishes like a keen scalpel. Alara, bring me some tea now. I halted, my hands dipped in soapy water. Hold on, I'm doing the dishes. What? His tone was incredulous and impatient. Stop that, and bring me the tea right away. Can't you obey simple commands? But, I began, only to be interrupted. What a useless wife you are. Make me some sweet coffee, said another voice. Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, spoke from the living room. She sat there, munching a slice of cake she had grabbed from the fridge, her eyes gleaming with malice. I sighed and looked at the stack of dishes. There are so many. Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife, Alex's voice hissed, each syllable hurting. I was Alara, a 28-year-old working mother whose life felt more like a jail than a home. Married at 23, I had hoped for love and friendship, but instead found myself in the hands of Alex and his domineering mother. Our 4-year-old son was the only bright spot in an otherwise dark existence. We lived in Alex's parents' house, a decision foisted on me under the premise of caring for Mrs. Whitmore after my father-in-law died. Initially, I sympathized with her alleged anguish, but it quickly became evident that I was nothing more than a part in her cruel game of home oppression. Cooking, cleaning, and working just weren't enough. My attempts were treated with derision, and my meals were either left untouched or sharply ridiculed. The stir-fry is so half-hearted, Mrs. Whitmore would remark. Cook it properly from scratch. I'm busy and can only do simple things, I'd say, trying to maintain a calm voice. That's why I hate backtalk from my daughter-in-law, she quipped. Cook from scratch. Why don't you cook? You are a good cook, correct? I risked to react once and soon regretted it. Why would I do housekeeping with you here? She responded coldly and dismissively. Are you out of your mind? Their brutality grew with time, progressing from harsh words to a chilling quiet. They began to entirely disregard me, as if I were a ghost in my own home. My presence, which was previously underestimated, now appeared completely invisible. 5 years passed in this suffocating environment. Alex and I turned 35 and 33 respectively. Our son developed, but the unpleasant atmosphere in the house remained constant. My mother-in-law, now 63, appeared to thrive on my suffering. One evening, as I trudged home from work, a heavy revelation hit me. They saw my existence as meaningless. I was a shadow, unnoticed and unheard. The only voice that acknowledged me was my son's. The idea of losing even that minor recognition was agonizing. When I returned home, I started cooking right away, hoping to lift my spirits. I made mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a stir-fry with bell peppers and pork, attempting to bring some regularity to our dinner. Bring me the mayo, Alex said unexpectedly, breaking his long silence. Sure, here you are, I said, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not thanks or discussion, but rather a command. It was the last straw, the limit of my patience and tolerance. Mrs. Whitmore demanded, clean the toilet? What? Now? I was shocked. Yes, now, she demanded, her voice full of hate. I snapped back, unable to suppress my annoyance. Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty, just like your heart, she said. Our dispute immediately escalated, with Alex interjecting and demanding that I apologize to his mother. But I refused, standing firm for the first time in years. The conflict reached its climax, and a conclusion formed within me. I needed to get out of this toxic environment, not just for myself, but also for my baby. I returned to my room, my determination stiffening. I downloaded divorce papers, completed them, and slapped them in front of Alex. His amazement was evident, but I felt just icy determination. I'm filing these, I announced, my voice firm. As I stood there, looking at my husband's puzzled expression, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to regain my life. The days after I declared my divorce were a blur of frigid stares and stinging remarks, but in the midst of the chaos, I discovered an unexpected sense of freedom. Mrs. Whitmore looked at the food I was serving one evening with distaste. You call this food? Even a child cooks better. I bit my tongue, concentrating on my son's happy expression. Eat up, sweetheart. I made your favorite tonight. Alex added in, his voice full of sarcasm. Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke. I could feel my rage rising, but I held my cool. I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son. Mrs. Whitmore snorted. Don't act high and mighty, you're just a burden in this house. The tension around the table was apparent. Alex's attempts to insult me grew more intense. So, Alara, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life. I stared him directly in the eyes. I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son. His smirk faded somewhat, and a spark of concern appeared on his face. Mrs. Whitmore was quick to intercede. Don't be absurd. You need us more than we need you. The talk drifted to finances, which they typically avoided. You do realize that without my salary, this household would crumble, I said to myself rather than to them. Mrs. Whitmore sneered. We'd manage, we don't need your pity money. But Alex's silence spoke volumes. He understood the truth. They would be in serious financial trouble if I did not provide a living. Their behavior deteriorated during the next few days. Mrs. Whitmore alternated between trying to sweet-talk me into staying and shouting insults when I refused. Alex, on the other hand, appeared confused, his arrogance eroding as the reality of his financial dependency became clear. One afternoon, I overheard a talk between them that chilled me to the core. She can't just leave us like this, Alex growled. We need her money. Mrs. Whitmore's response was chilly and calculating. Do not worry. I have a plan. We'll make her life so unpleasant that she won't want to leave. Hearing their genuine objectives exposed was a revelation. They did not care about me or our son. It was all about power and wealth. That night, as I lay in bed, an idea began to emerge in my head. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But it would not be fought with words or trivial disputes. I'd strike them where it hurts the most. their pride and their pocketbook. The following morning, I began putting my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, a bright, no-nonsense woman who was highly recommended. I want a divorce, and I want to make sure they don't get a penny more than they deserve, I informed the woman. She nodded, her eyes bright with determination. We'll make sure of it. You've been the only breadwinner, correct? We'll make use of that. My resolve got stronger with each passing day. I began documenting everything: insults, financial manipulation, and even little grievances. It was time to turn the tables. It was time to accept the repercussions of their deeds. As I prepared my case, I felt a sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I felt like I had power over my own fate. The shades of scorn were slowly lifting, revealing a new dawn. As the divorce proceedings began, the mood in the house became more caustic. Yet, with each passing day, my panic faded, replaced by a steely resolve. Mrs. Whitmore decided to try a new strategy one evening. "Alara, dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family." Her comments were insincere. I met her stare unwaveringly. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me." Alex, who had been silently watching, scoffed. "Oh, playing the victim now? You're not as innocent as you pretend to be." I felt a wave of rage, but I kept my voice composed. "I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat." As is typically the case, the subject turned to finances. "You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him?" Alex was skeptical. I grinned with a tiny, confident curl of my lips. "I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage." Mrs. Whitmore turned her gaze into a sneer. "You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back." But their remarks no longer had force over me. I recognized my worth and knew the truth. The following day, I met with my lawyer again. She outlined the strategy clearly. "We'll expose their financial dependency on you. It will play a crucial role in the custody battle and the division of assets." I nodded, feeling vindicated. The law was on my side, and I was prepared to fight back. At home, the tension had reached a boiling point. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to discredit me got increasingly desperate. "You think you're so smart," she sneered one evening. "But you're just a cold-hearted woman abandoning your family." I stared her directly in the eyes. I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself." Alex leapt in, his voice full of fury. "You'll regret this. You can't survive without me." However, his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. As the days passed, my preparations for the court battle became more intense. I obtained financial accounts, documented their harsh remarks, and gathered evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I was arranging my documents, my kid approached me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" His voice was soft and hesitant. I drew him into an embrace, feeling a flash of protectiveness. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life, just you and me." His arms tightened around me, and I knew I'd made the correct decision. I was fighting not just for myself, but also for my son's future. The court hearing date approached, bringing with it the prospect of impending freedom. I was prepared to confront Alex and Mrs. Whitmore and put an end to their tyranny and emotional abuse. I was ready to take back my life and give my son the peace and happiness he deserved. It was time for justice, and I was determined to see it delivered. The court hearing day arrived, and I was filled with both dread and determination. I felt a sense of surrealism when I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in court. This was the moment when everything changed. The proceedings started with frigid formality. Alex's lawyer portrayed him as a dedicated spouse and parent battling under unjust accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the sorrowful mother-in-law who had been wronged by her ungrateful daughter-in-law. However, their performance was apparent, and their lies were flimsy. When my turn came, I spoke clearly and steadily. "I've been the only provider for this family for years. My husband's unemployment and his mother's manipulative behavior have been continual sources of stress." Alex intervened, his voice tinged with faint hurt. "Alara, how can you say such things? I've always backed you." I turned to him, my stare steadfast. "Alex, support is more than words. It's about deeds, and your actions have only demonstrated selfishness and harshness." The judge listened closely as I presented my evidence, which included financial accounts, audio recordings of their verbal abuse, and testimony from neighbors who witnessed their behavior. The fact was undeniable. As the evidence accumulated, Alex's facade began to collapse. Mrs. Whitmore's poise shattered, and her innocence slipped away. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anxiety. Then came the realization that sealed their doom. My lawyer submitted photos and documentation confirming Alex's adultery and Mrs. Whitmore's clandestine affair with Mr. Harwood, a wealthy neighbor. Murmurs broke out in the courtroom as the photographs of them in compromising postures were shown. Their lie was exposed for all to see. Alex's face became ashen, his eyes wide with surprise. Mrs. Whitmore's face twisted into rage, and her hands trembled. You compromised our privacy?" she yelled, her voice shrill. I glanced at her, my voice steady yet forceful. I revealed the truth, which you both had been hiding for far too long. The court shouted for order, but the harm was already done. Their credibility was shattered, and their lies were revealed in the bright light of the courtroom. As the session concluded, the judge's conclusion was apparent. I was given full custody of our son, and a fair distribution of assets was ordered. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with just their destroyed reputations. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. The years of deception and emotional assault had finally ended. I had confronted my oppressors and emerged victorious. But the finest moment was when my son raced into my arms outside the courthouse, his face beaming with relief and joy. "We did it, Mom," he exclaimed, his voice full of delight. "Yes, we did," I said, holding him close. "We're free now. This is only the beginning for us." As we walked away hand in hand, I realized this was more than simply a personal win. It was a victory for everybody who has ever been made to feel little, helpless, or unworthy. It represented a victory for truth and justice. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one full of optimism and the promise of a better future. The court verdict had an immediate and chaotic impact. The story of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deception spread like wildfire, ruining their reputations in our little neighborhood. They could no longer hide behind their facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, I concentrated on rebuilding my life with my kid, but I couldn't deny the gratification of knowing Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the repercussions of their decisions. One evening, as I was making dinner, I had an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Harwood, Mr. Harwood's wife, appeared, her eyes crimson from unshed tears. "Alara, I've heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore did," she exclaimed, her voice breaking. I invited her in and offered a cup of tea. As we sat at the kitchen table, she expressed her sadness. I trusted her as a neighbor and friend. And to think she was having an affair with my husband. Her voice trembled, so I listened and offered words of comfort. Mrs. Whitmore's actions had clearly caused far more damage than she had planned. The next day, I saw Alex in town. He was a shell of his former self, his arrogance replaced with a defeated expression. "Alara, please. Can we speak?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I paused, facing him. "What's there to talk about, Alex?" He fidgeted, unwilling to meet my gaze. I apologize for everything. I didn't understand how much I relied on you and your strength." His apologies, however late, reflected the shift in power. He had lost everything, his dignity, his home, and his family, and in that loss, he had finally admitted his own flaws. Mrs. Whitmore, however, received the greatest criticism. Her affair with Mr. Harwood had not only wrecked her reputation but also resulted in legal problems. Mrs. Harwood sought a divorce and sued her for alienation of affection. I learned of Mrs. Whitmore's dilemma from neighbors. Whispers and tales depicted a lady undone by her own acts. She had become an outsider, rejected by individuals she had previously considered friends. I saw her at the grocery store one day, hurrying through the aisles with downcast eyes. Our paths touched, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. The sight of hatred and defeat in her eyes was undeniable. "You did this to me," she said under her breath as she walked by. I watched Sylvia leave, her figure slowly fading as she hurried away, her eyes filled with resentment. I felt a strange mix of pity for her and vindication for myself. "No, Sylvia," I whispered under my breath. "You did this to yourself." The tides of justice had finally shifted. Everything they had done to me, all the lies, the manipulation, the emotional torment, had come full circle. The consequences of their actions were now irreversible. I could see them struggling, living in the aftermath of the deceit they had carefully cultivated over the years. Their false facade had shattered, and now they were forced to face the reality of what they had become. As I watched them suffer through the consequences of their own making, I felt a sense of calm satisfaction. But it wasn't just about them getting what they deserved. The real reward was in the freedom I had gained. The best form of retribution, I realized, was not in revenge, but in living a life full of peace and strength, free from the toxicity and harmful influence they had cast upon me for so long. My focus shifted back to what truly mattered: the future I was building with my son. We were free now, free from the prison they had trapped me in for all those years. I had broken free, and now, I was living the life I had always dreamed of. This wasn't just a story of revenge or victory. It was a story of liberation. It was a powerful testament to my strength and resilience. I had taken control of my destiny, broken the chains of abuse, and freed myself from the tyranny of their manipulation. As I looked ahead, I knew that the future was bright, and the best was yet to come. I was no longer a prisoner to their cruelty. I was free, and the world was mine to conquer.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
Now to the next story 5. I paid for my parents to go on a luxury trip, but they chose to take my sister instead. After they left, I canceled all the reservations. I treated my parents to a lavish one-week trip to Europe with me. When I picked them up to take them to the airport, they informed me that they had elected to travel with my jobless sister instead of me. My mother grinned. "Your sister needed some rest, so we decided to take her." I did not say anything. When they arrived in Europe, they were treated to a great surprise. "You're late," my mother exclaimed, stepping out onto the porch and lugging her bag behind her. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was 6:02 a.m., 2 minutes late. "Mom," I replied, attempting a grin. I got out of the car to help with the baggage, but then I noticed my sister Lauren emerge from the house, carrying her own suitcase. My smile froze. "What's going on?" I inquired, attempting to keep my voice calm. My mother turned to me, her face way too happy for the circumstances. "Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately, and she really needs this trip." My chest tightened. "Instead of me? Mom, I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything." She waved her hand dismissively, as if I had simply brought up something unimportant. "And we're grateful, sweetheart, but you're always working so hard. You can take another trip later. Lauren needs this right now." Lauren did not even have the decency to appear guilty. She only smirked and shifted her weight to one hip. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she murmured, her voice dripping with phony sincerity. I looked at the two of them, my heart racing in my chest. My father walked out a bit later, avoiding eye contact and handing me his suitcase. "This is unbelievable," I exclaimed, my voice shaking. "This was supposed to be our trip, something for me to share with you." "Well, it still is," my mother replied with a smile. "Just with Lauren instead. Don't make this a big deal, Violet. Your sister really needs a break. My name is Violet, and I've been working extra hours for the past 2 years to provide my parents with an unforgettable vacation. Flights, luxury hotels, guided tours, I meticulously organized every detail, down to the last dinner reservation." But as I stood in my parents' driveway, watching my sister enter the rear seat of my car, I realized something I had been ignoring for years. It didn't matter how hard I tried. Lauren was always number one in their eyes. I clenched my jaw, biting back the angry retort that was on the tip of my tongue. Instead, I contrived a stiff smile before opening the trunk. "Let's get going then," I murmured, my voice flat. "If they want to prioritize her over me, that's okay. They may accompany her, but I wasn't about to let them enjoy it." Except for Lauren's constant conversation, the drive to the airport was eerily quiet. "Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I can't wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that, or will the tours take up the whole day?" My hands tightened over the steering wheel as I stared straight ahead, forcing myself not to say anything. My mother giggled quietly. "Of course we'll have time. We'll figure it out when we get there." I bit the inside of my cheeks. When we get there. They didn't appear to notice I wasn't a member of that we anymore. At one point, my father cleared his throat. "Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual." I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Unusual? That's an interesting way to put it, Dad." He did not respond. He simply shifted uncomfortably in his seat, maybe wishing he hadn't spoken at all. Lauren leaned forward from the back seat, her words harsh. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own." I clenched my mouth and forced a tight smile. "Of course, Lauren. Enjoy the trip." By the time we arrived at the airport drop-off zone, my patience had worn thin. My mom hugged me as I helped them unload their luggage. "Thank you for understanding, dear. This means a lot to us and Lauren," my mother explained. I nodded stiffly. "Sure, Mom." Lauren smiled as she wheeled her bag to the entrance. "Thanks, Violet. You're the best. I stood there, watching them disappear into the terminal, my chest tight with anger and hurt. The ride back home was a blur, and I replayed the conversation in my head over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. This means a lot to Lauren. You're not mad, right? You're always working so hard. I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then, without a second thought, I marched into the house, pulled out my laptop, and logged into every travel account I'd used to book the trip. Hotel reservations were canceled. Tours were refunded. Airline upgrades were denied. When I closed my laptop, a sense of satisfaction settled over me. They could explain themselves to the front desk staff in Paris, and I was done being their doormat. The tightness in my chest began to ease as I stared at the confirmation emails piling up in my inbox. If they wanted to take Lauren instead of me, that was fine, but they would not be staying in 5-star hotels or taking private tours on my dime. The calls began as soon as their flight landed, and as I unpacked my suitcase, the one I'd packed so meticulously for a trip that was no longer mine, the irony was not lost on me. I hung up my clothes and neatly placed my shoes back on the rack. I groaned, picking up the phone and glanced at the screen, where my mother's name flashed along with multiple missed calls and texts. I unlocked the phone and read through the messages. Violet, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Call me right away. Violet, this isn't humorous. Fix it now. I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Did they really expect me to sweep in and save the day after what they had done? The phone rang again, this time with a call from Lauren, and I let it ring until she left a voicemail. Violet, this is so petty, she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. We're stuck here because of you. You must contact the hotel immediately and resolve the issue. I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. I'd been their fixer for years, smoothing over every mistake and picking up the slack, but not anymore. I eventually decided to respond, if only to stop the torrent of calls. My mother's voice hit me like a tidal wave of hatred as soon as I picked up. Violet, what have you done? The hotel claims the reservation was canceled, and none of the trips are scheduled anymore. I let her yell for a bit before calmly responding, I canceled them. After a long, startled silence, she yelled, Why would you do that? Oh, I don't know, I responded, my tone tinged with sarcasm. Maybe because you chose to accompany Lauren on my trip. You're lucky that I drove you to the airport. We thought you'd understand, she snapped. Understand what? I inquired, my voice rising. Those years of saving and preparing were irrelevant because Lauren required a break. Did you think my efforts were in vain? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand, and I don't want to. I hung up before she could react and switched off my phone, tossing it on the couch. The calm that followed was beautiful, and I felt like I could breathe again. If they wanted to prioritize Lauren, fine, but they could work out the rest of the journey without me. The calm lasted barely a day, and the next morning, my phone was humming again with calls and messages, which I initially ignored. I spent the day cleaning the home and catching up on work, but curiosity got the best of me, and by the evening, I had opened my phone and braced myself for the storm of texts. From my mother. Violet, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears, your father is upset, and we can't get into any of the hotels you booked. Lauren. You're acting like a child, and I don't see why you're making this such a huge issue. Just repair it already. Finally, from my father. We need to discuss. This isn't right. I set the phone down, shaking my head. For years I'd been the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was comfortable and happy, and now that I'd taken a step back, they didn't know what to do. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table, letting the anger simmer. How dare they expect me to clean up their mess? How dare they act as if I was the one in the wrong? The next call arrived minutes later, and this time I answered. Violet, my mother said before I could respond. This isn't amusing anymore. We are stranded. Do you know how embarrassing this is? I took a leisurely sip of tea. Embarrassing? Do you think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, organizing every detail, and then being told you aren't even going on the trip you paid for. Stop being dramatic, she said. Lauren needed this more than you. And now she can figure it out, I stated firmly. You have made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me, that's great. But don't expect me to pay for her vacation. We're family, she said. We don't do this to each other? I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. Lauren's voice rang out in the background crying, Mom, just hang up on her. She is being impossible. That was the last straw. Enjoy your trip, I said, my tone frigid. Oh, you can't, because it isn't your trip. That was my. And now it belongs to nobody. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond and turned off my phone. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mix of anger and relief. Angry that they'd put me in this situation, but relief that I'd finally stood up for myself. They could call me dramatic all they wanted, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me. The following few days were blissfully quiet. With my phone turned off, I finally had space to think clearly, free of the barrage of guilt trips and accusations. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying the calm I'd craved for so long. My afternoons were filled with work and catching up on little projects I'd been putting off. Things that reminded me how capable I was when I wasn't bogged down by their endless demands. But on the third day, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned on my phone to find over a dozen voicemails waiting for me, the first few of which were from my mother, who became increasingly upset with each one. Violet, you should call me back right now. This has gone too far. I cannot believe you are doing this. You have embarrassed us. We are your parents. How could you treat us like this? Then followed Lauren's messages, full of the same entitled tone she'd always used. This is so petty, even for you. You are wrecking everything. Just fix it, Violet. Finally, my father's voice, lower but no less pointed. Violet, I don't understand what's happened to you. Call us back so we can work this out. I paused before listening to my mother's final voicemail, which was lengthy and filled with frustration and exhaustion. Violet, she said. We are back at the airport now. The trip is destroyed, and I hope you are satisfied with yourself. Your sister is upset, and your father and I are beyond disappointed. Call us when you're ready to speak. I deleted the voicemails without responding because I wasn't prepared to talk, and I honestly didn't know if I ever would be. This wasn't a one-time error, it was the sum of years of them putting Lauren first and expecting me to accept it with a smile. As the hours passed, I reflected on all the times I'd been overlooked or dismissed, every holiday where Lauren's whims dictated the plans, every family gathering where my accomplishments were treated as afterthoughts. This trip had been the tipping point, but the cracks had been forming for years. Grace arrived abruptly that evening, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an evident air of inquiry. I heard about what happened, she continued, placing the coffee on the table. Your mom called me yesterday. Of course, she had. My mother was always adept at enlisting sympathizers to coerce me into obedience. And? I inquired, taking a sip. Grace shrugged, a sneaky smile forming on her face. I told her you were probably busy and would get back to her when you were ready. I laughed and shook my head. You're the best. No, you're the best, she continued, her tone becoming more serious. Because you finally stood up for yourself. I understand how difficult that is, Violet. Do not let them drag you back down. Her words stayed with me long after she departed. Grace was correct. I'd spent far too long bending over backwards to please people who didn't seem to care about my efforts. It was time to halt that cycle once and for all. By the weekend, I had a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still simmering beneath the surface, but it was joined by something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Freedom from their endless expectations. Freedom from being the family's fixer. Freedom to finally live on my own terms. But, as expected, the silence did not last long. It was Sunday afternoon when I received a phone call from my father, which I decided to answer. Violet, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Your mother wanted me to call. She believes you will listen to me. Go on, I murmured, reclining back in my chair. He sighed. Look, things have gotten out of hand. Your mother is outraged, Lauren is enraged, and everything is simply a mess. But you are better than this. I stiffened, his words eliciting a new wave of rage. Better than what, Dad? Stand up for myself? I refuse to let you walk all over me again. That's not what I meant, he answered hurriedly. It's just that you've always been the sensible one, the one who keeps everything together. This is not like you. I let out a short, bitter laugh. You're correct. I'm not leaning over backwards to clean up your mess, which is unusual for me. He hesitated, and I thought he might finally understand my point of view, but then he replied, You're punishing the entire family for one decision. Is that actually fair? Fair, I repeated, my voice rising. You want to talk about fairness? Was it fair that you and Mom thought I wasn't significant enough to join the trip I had planned? Was it right that you replaced me with Lauren, as if I didn't matter? That's not what we were trying to do, he added defensively. We just thought Lauren needed it more. Of course you did, I yelled. You always believe she requires more, More attention, more support, more of everything. And I am always asked to make sacrifices for her. Not anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and he eventually muttered, "I don't know what you want me to say." "I don't need you to say anything," I said, my voice firm. "I just need you to understand that I'm tired of being an afterthought. From now on, I'll come first. Goodbye, Dad." I ended the call and set the phone down, my hands trembling. For the rest of the day, I allowed myself to feel everything: anger, sadness, relief. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the beginning of something new. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore, and I wasn't going to be. They could figure out how to clean up their own messes. When my parents and Lauren returned, I was waiting for them in their driveway, sipping coffee and feeling remarkably calm as I watched their cab arrive. Lauren was the first to comment as they came out, dragging their baggage behind them, their expressions filled with tiredness and displeasure. "Well, I hope you're happy, Violet." I arched an eyebrow and remained sitting on the porch swing. "Happy about what?" "Our trip was a disaster," my mother exclaimed, waving her hand as if to dismiss the whole thing. "We spent the entire week sleeping in dirty hotels and eating bad cuisine since we couldn't afford anything decent. And don't get me started on the tours," Lauren interjected, crossing her arms. "Oh, there weren't any? Do you know how embarrassing it was to arrive and be informed there was no reservation?" I took another sip of coffee, allowing their complaints to wash over me. "Sounds rough," I finally responded calmly. "But you wanted to take Lauren, remember? I'm sure you guys had a terrific bonding experience." "That's not the point," my mother replied, her voice rising. "You knew we couldn't afford everything you'd planned. You set us up for failure." I stood up and placed my mug on the tiny table beside me. "No, Mom, I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for the three of us, something unique that I had been saving for years. You are the ones who decided to cut me out at the last moment." My father eventually spoke up, his tone calmer but no less accusatory. "You didn't have to cancel everything, Violet. That was extreme." "Was that it?" I asked, folding my arms. Why should I have paid for a trip to which I had not even been invited? If Lauren needed it so much, you should have organized it yourself. You're lucky I didn't cancel your return flight. Lauren rolled her eyes. "You are so dramatic. It's only money, Violet." "And you're so entitled," I shot back, my patience now fraying. "Do you know how much effort and sacrifice went into preparing that trip? Or do you simply believe that things will emerge for you because someone else takes care of them?" They stood there, surprised and silent for a time. "I've spent years being the responsible one," I said, my voice steady but forceful. "The one who fixes things, prepares things, and ensures everything works well. And you've spent just as long taking everything for granted." "That's not fair," my mother began, but I intervened by raising a hand. "No, Mom. What is unfair is the way you treated me. You chose Lauren above me, like you usually do. So I decided to stop being your doormat. You did not want me on the trip? Fine. But you don't get to reap the advantages of my hard work without me." I grabbed my bag from the porch swing and turned to leave. "I'm glad you're safe, but don't expect things to return to normal. I'm finished." As I walked to my car, I heard them calling after me, their voices a mix of anger and guilt, but I didn't look back. The drive home from my parents' house felt strangely peaceful. For years, every visit had left me emotionally drained, but this time I felt lighter. I'd finally said everything I'd been holding in, and for once, I wasn't concerned about their reaction. When I got home, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch, replaying the confrontation in my head. They'd been so sure I'd fold, that I'd give in like always, but watching their stunned faces as I walked away was a reminder of how much I'd changed. It didn't matter if they were angry, hurt, or embarrassed, I was done living my life to meet their expectations. The next day, Grace called me. "How did it go?" she inquired, not bothering with pleasantries. I laughed, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "Just as you'd expect. They're outraged, Lauren is pouting, and Mom is probably attempting to guilt me back into line." Grace snorted. "Let her try. You have a backbone now, and I'm here to keep it in place." I smiled, appreciative for her unfailing support. "Thank you, Grace. I mean it. You've been my rock throughout this." "Anytime," she responded, her voice softening. "So, what's next for you now that you're no longer the family fixer?" That question had been swirling in my head since the confrontation. What was next? For years, so much of my energy had been spent attempting to satisfy my family and earn their approval, but now that I'd let go of that burden, the choices felt endless, and a little terrifying. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I feel like I get to make the decision. Not them, nor anyone else. Just me. Sounds like the start of something amazing, Grace commented, her voice bright with a smile. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes that felt big in their own way. I redecorated my living room, swapping out my parents' hand-me-down furniture for pieces that felt uniquely mine. I spent weekends exploring local cafes and parks, things I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. And I started journaling, writing down my thoughts and dreams without filtering them through the lens of what others might think. Each small step felt like I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost until I sat down one evening and opened the spreadsheet I'd used to plan the trip. The canceled reservations stared back at me, and I didn't feel a pang of regret, but rather a surge of determination. That money had been meant for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. I closed the spreadsheet and opened a new browser tab and typed solo travel ideas. A few weeks after my parents' return, I booked a solo trip to Italy. It wasn't the same itinerary I'd planned for them, and it wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was for me, a chance to celebrate my independence and finally prioritize me. I had never traveled alone before, but as soon as I stepped out of the airport and into the bustling city, I knew I'd made the right decision. I spent my days wandering cobblestone streets, marveling at ancient ruins, and indulging in meals at charming little cafes. There was no schedule, no one else to consider. Just me and the freedom to do whatever I wanted. One afternoon, while sitting on the Spanish steps with a gelato in hand, I pulled out the journal I'd brought with me. For years, I'd written about what I wanted to achieve, but those dreams were always wrapped up in making someone else happy. Now, as I wrote, the focus shifted. Learn a new language. Start a small business. Travel to at least 5 more countries. The list grew, each goal a reflection of the life I wanted to create, not the one I'd been expected to live. On my last night in Florence, I had dinner at a small family-run restaurant overlooking the Arno River, and as I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace. This trip had been more than just a vacation. It was a turning point. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my family's approval, but here, thousands of miles away, I realized something important. I didn't need it. I was enough just as I was. When I returned home, my parents tried to reach out again, this time with softer tones and carefully worded messages. Hope you had a nice trip. One text from my mom read. Maybe we can all talk soon. I stared at the message for a moment before setting my phone down. I wasn't ready to respond, which was fine. This time, it would be on my terms, and I felt proud as I unpacked my luggage and displayed treasures on my shelves. A week after returning from my trip, my mother called, and this time I answered. Hi Violet, she said, her tone strangely soft. How was your trip? It was amazing, I said, keeping my tone neutral. That's nice to hear, she replied, hesitating as if to find the proper words. We've been thinking a lot about what occurred. Perhaps we handled things terribly. The admission astonished me, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook just yet. Poorly. You unexpectedly replaced me on a trip that I had planned and paid for. Poorly is an understatement. I know, she said. Your dad and I, we didn't realize how much it would hurt you. And Lauren? I asked. Does she feel awful too, or is she still blaming me for ruining her vacation? She's upset, says my mother. But I think she knows she could have handled things better. I sighed, resting against the counter. Mom, this wasn't just about the trip. It's been years of putting her first and expecting me to make up the difference. I am not doing it anymore. I understand, she answered after a time. We will strive to do better. We do not want to lose you. Her comment struck a chord deep within me, but I'd learned not to let guilt influence my decisions. I'm delighted to hear that, I answered. But it will take more than words to heal this. I want to see actual effort, not just apologies. You will, she told me. We'll give you the space you need, but I hope you'll let us back in someday. After the call, I had a combination of emotions, relief that they were finally admitting their behavior, and skepticism about whether they'd ever change. But when I sat down with my journal that evening, I understood something important. Whether or not they changed was not my duty. Over the following months, I maintained my strict boundaries, responding to their calls and texts when I felt like it, but not going out of my way to solve things or smooth over tensions. Instead, I focused on creating the life I want. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or energy for, joined a local hiking group, and even started planning my next solo trip. Each step felt like regaining another aspect of myself. One day, as I stood on my balcony watching the sunset, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the person who went above and beyond for people who didn't respect me. Instead, I was someone who valued herself, established boundaries, and wasn't scared to stand up for what she deserved. I felt completely liberated.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
Now to the next story 6. After 6 years of married, my wife proposed we open our marriage. So I filed for divorce and blocked her access to my $12,000 paycheck. I, 37, have been married to Sharon, 39, for 6 years and known her for 10. I serve in the Marine Corps as a logistics officer, and I am deployed for 6 to 7 months each year. My job pays well, approximately $120,000 with benefits and combat pay, which allows us to live comfortably. In 2014, we met through mutual acquaintances at a cookout. I was already in the Marines, and she was an elementary school teacher who earned around $45,000 per year. She seemed different from the other ladies I had dated. She understood the military lifestyle because her father had served for 25 years. She was self-sufficient, had her own career, and did not desire me solely for the advantages, unlike several military wives I had known. After 4 years of dating, we married in a beautiful ceremony in front of friends and family. Her father, a veteran himself, was pleased to welcome another military man into the family. The first several years were excellent. Sharon was encouraging about my job and proud of my service, and we made the most of our time together while I was home. During deployments, she kept busy teaching, going to her book club, and spending time with military wives who understood her situation. We established a routine, weekly video dates, care packages, and occasional visits while I was at port. I even bought her a 4-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood near her school, replaced her car every few years, and made sure she had all she needed. She always felt the deployments were worthwhile, and she was happy to be a military spouse. We discussed having children, but agreed to wait until I could obtain a desk job because she didn't want to raise them alone for half the year. Life seemed wonderful until everything changed. Sharon began spending more time with a new set of yoga class acquaintances, most of whom were single women or divorced mothers from her school. She shared photos of their girls' nights out at upscale restaurants and clubs, places we used to frequent. I didn't think much of it, believing she'd be busy while I was away. She began to care more about her looks, purchasing nice clothes, having her hair done frequently, and joined a gym with a personal trainer. I assumed she was rewarding herself with the money I made. Looking back, all of these were red signs. During a normal video call date night, Sharon suddenly exclaimed, "Let's open our marriage." I thought she was kidding, but she was dead serious. When I questioned what was going on, she replied she had been thinking about it for a time and felt it was best for us. She asserted that no woman could control her cravings for 6 months and that she was tired of dealing with deployments. She had been living a single life much of the time, desiring closeness. I felt awful about how she reduced our marriage to nothing more than sex. After 10 years together, 6 of them were married, she surprised me with this. I tried to remain cool and thanked her for everything she did to keep us going. I informed her that the distance was part of my profession, which we both agreed upon when we married. We'd discussed transferring to a desk job before, but the chances hadn't come up, and I really enjoyed what I did. Sharon was aware of this and seemed to agree with it, at least until recently. She became irritated when I attempted to have a sensible debate. I proposed we discuss it later, when we were both calmer, but she insisted on settling it right now. She complained about being lonely, spending birthdays and anniversaries alone, and going to doctor's visits by herself. She began crying while discussing all of this. Look, I understand it's difficult. I miss a lot of key moments too, but what am I expected to do? This was exactly what she signed up for when she married me. When we initially married, many people advised us to have a child to keep her occupied during deployments, but Sharon was not ready to be a single parent for half the year, and I agreed. It wasn't fair to dump that responsibility on her, so we decided not to have children until I got a desk job. Now I'm wondering if that decision worsened her loneliness. Still, opening the marriage? That's not right. I inquired whether she was breaking up with me. She responded, "No, I love you. I could never leave you. I want to grow old with you. But I'm about to turn 40, and in a few more years, I'll hit menopause. I have so little time to enjoy my sexuality. Half of my golden years are going just waiting for you. I don't want that. I want to live a fulfilling life and not die with regret." She had never discussed sex in such detail during our relationship. We always had a strong physical connection when I was home. Sure, we used toys and video conversations to keep close throughout deployments, but she never complained that it wasn't enough. I could see this talk wasn't going well. She wasn't asking for permission, she was telling me what she planned to do. "What exactly do you want?" I inquired, despite my fear of hearing the truth. She stared at me through the screen and said, "I want to open this marriage and meet other men. I have needs, and they must be met. I'm doing this whether you like it or not." The lady I married, who pledged to remain faithful through everything, was sitting there telling me she was going to sleep with other males, and there was nothing I could do about it. I tried to remain calm, even though I wanted to strike something. "So you want to sleep with other men while still being married to me?" I said. When she nodded, I asked how this would help her loneliness. Would these random males care for her while she was sick or celebrate her birthday? She stated she wasn't sure if it would be physical or if she would date them, but whatever happened, she loved me and only me. They'd only be fillers while I was gone. When I get home, she will be all mine. As if I'm supposed to be okay with sharing my wife for half of the year. Then I questioned how long this would last. A few years or forever? She had not made a decision. I questioned if she had already cheated on me. She snapped, "If I wanted to cheat, I wouldn't be having this conversation." She thought being honest about wanting to sleep with other males was preferable to lying about it. There's some warped logic there. I inquired whether I had any say in this. She claimed her mind was made up. If she didn't do this, she would go insane. My head was throbbing. I informed her that I needed time to consider. She simply hung up without saying goodbye. What makes this situation even more messed up? I just left home 3 or 4 weeks ago after 3 months together. Throughout my absence, everything appeared to be in order. We flew to Hawaii for our second honeymoon, fixed up the house as she requested, and even discussed eventually trying for a baby next year. She was very lovey-dovey the entire time, always discussing our future together. The day I left, she was grieving and making preparations for my next leave. We had even started saving money for our future child. I was looking for opportunities at the nearby base so I could spend more time at home. That's how committed we were to starting a family. When I inquired the next day why she didn't bring it up while I was there, she stated she didn't feel the need for other males around me. That's when something clicked. She's undoubtedly met someone at her new gym or through those single buddies. The timing was quite convenient. Just before I left, she highlighted a new personal trainer at her gym who was really inspiring and had been giving her extra attention. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the way she pushed for it shortly after I left made it seem planned. Part of me wanted to believe it was just about loneliness, but I'm not that gullible. My friend Mike went through something similar last year. His wife requested an open marriage during his deployment, but it found out she was already dating someone. They are now divorced. I questioned Sharon again if this was really what she wanted, if she had considered what it would mean for us and our future plans. She replied yes without hesitation, as if the 3 months we spent planning our lives together mattered nothing. I decided to really push her on the details. Not because I was considering it, but to understand her faulty logic. I inquired about the setting. Could I see other women? How would we handle the money? Her response demonstrated how selfish this whole situation was. She claimed she hadn't considered that far ahead. She merely wanted someone to look after her needs while I was away, but when I returned, it would be just us two. She stated I could try stuff on port days, but I couldn't see other ladies at home because she would be there. According to her excellent idea, we'd see how it goes, and possibly end the marriage once she'd finished exploring. I had had enough. Look, this isn't what I signed up for. I wanted a monogamous marriage, but since you've made up your mind, I won't stop you. Just remember, I'm not going to sit here and take it. There will be consequences. She had the audacity to ask what I was going to do about it. I quietly informed her. First, she'd have to cover her own expenses. No more money in our joint account. Second, we'd sever all communication. I didn't want calls or texts when she was occupied with her business. Third, I might start seeing other women, with no restrictions from her. She laughed and said she knew I'd come along, that she was excited, and that it would be enjoyable. Then she said, "I know you won't go too far. How can you leave such a ravishing beauty?" And began removing her clothes. I shut that down quickly. My conditions begin today. Have fun. Then I hung up. That was it. I stopped caring about her. She attempted to reach out, but I ignored everything. She began uploading obvious date night and vacation shots without revealing the guys. But come on, a hot tub selfie with rose petals, candles, and 2 wine glasses? It's not hard to figure out what's happening. Her sister texted to ask if I knew what Sharon was doing. I told her straight out, Sharon started the marriage without my permission because she is lonely between her legs. Sharon blew up my phone after that, but I didn't care. My next shore leave begins next week. I already have my brother looking for an apartment. I told him and my parents the entire story. I also hired a lawyer to begin work on my case. I am not hurrying anything. I want to do this right and aim to make her regret her decisions. I will provide an update during my absence or when I return. If you've read this far, I appreciate it. Update 1. I need to address something quickly before getting into what happened. Everyone seems to sympathize with military women. Poor thing has to live alone, even though she's married. Or, what about her needs? And so on. Then they stare at me as if I'm the terrible guy for not understanding her circumstances. Yes, everything people say about it being difficult is correct, but nobody compelled her to marry me. She lives in our 4-bedroom house with a pool, which she could never afford as a teacher's salary. She drives a new BMW I bought for Christmas last year, carries Louis Vuitton luggage, and wears a Cartier watch that costs more than her monthly salary. Every summer, we take a vacation in Europe or the Caribbean. She has her hair done at luxury salons, attends yoga retreats, and never has to worry about bills. But it's funny how no one discusses these privileges when they're feeling sorry for her. She was living like a queen on my wages and complained about being lonely. Let me tell you something, keeping faithful isn't easy for us either. We travel across the world, stop at various ports, and have access to almost any luxury we desire. At the harbor, beautiful women are throwing themselves at soldiers in uniform. The majority of them do not care if you are married. My friends joke that I could have a girlfriend in every country if I wanted, but I've always remained faithful since that's what marriage means to me. Some of us continue to be faithful to our wives, but no one recognizes our efforts. They just presume that all military personnel cheat. Now for what transpired during my leave. I did not return to our residence. I couldn't bear the thought of being in the same bed as her other male partners. My brother had secured me an apartment in one of the town's new luxury towers. I spent the first few days with him and his family. My sister-in-law was upset when she learned what Sharon did. They used to be good friends. I brought my niece and nephew camping for the weekend, something I'd been promising them for years. The kids were asking where Aunt Sharon was, and I felt terrible having to make up explanations. Then I spent time with my parents in our hometown and caught up with old acquaintances, all of whom claimed they had never trusted Sharon. I shared everything on social media, not to be petty, but to show her that I wasn't sitting around depressed without her. My shore leave usually consists of these high-profile military parties, fancy gatherings held at 5-star hotels that Sharon always enjoyed attending. Not everyone is invited to these events. It's largely top commanders and their wives, politicians, and prominent citizens in town. These parties were significant for her social standing. She enjoyed showing off her beautiful outfits and attracting attention. I made sure to publish a lot of photos, including ones of female coworkers who are far more successful than her. Doctors, lawyers, and company owners. When people inquired about Sharon, I just told them the truth. She wanted an open marriage to screw about while I was gone. Word traveled quickly in our community, and all the military ladies who used to kiss her ass began unfriending her. When she first saw my family photos online, she simply texted me, asking where I was staying and why I wasn't at home. Then she switched to, "Okay, I'll give you space. I'll wait for you," as if she was doing me a favor. However, when she saw the party photos, she lost it. She began contacting me about how I abandoned her, wondering if we hadn't agreed to be normal. When I got home, she started messaging me at 2 a.m. about how much she missed our life together and how all these other guys didn't matter. I did not respond to any of it. After months of silence, I eventually said, "I never agreed to this. You did what you wanted. Now I'm doing what I want." She responded with some gibberish about waiting for me to come back when I'm done, as if I were a child acting out. She truly believed she could simply stop our marriage while she had her pleasure and then resume when she was finished exploring. A few months later, she contacted me, expressing a need to discuss the terms of our open marriage, as if we could sit down over coffee and arrange when she could cheat. I shut it down quickly. "Do whatever you want. I'm not playing this game." My lawyer told me to make a record of all these communications since they would be useful in the divorce. Then she saw me living my best life and sent me emails saying, "Let's go back to normal. I'm done with this," as if she could simply flick a switch and everything would be fine. She wrote a lengthy email about how she made a mistake, how none of these other guys made her feel the same way I did, and how she recognized what she was missing. She stated that she would do anything to save our marriage. I simply said, "Ha," and went on with my day. My mother, who hasn't spoken to Sharon since this incident, said it best. She didn't expect you to choose your dignity over her. Sharon unexpectedly dropped by my apartment one day. I have no idea who told her where I lived. I only shared my address with close family and a few trusted pals. Someone must have snitched, but I don't want to know who at this time. I was getting ready to go for a workout when I heard a knock. She looked totally different from when I left. She had lost weight, colored her hair blonde, and was wearing a tight outfit she had never worn before. She stood there, nervous, and asked why I wasn't staying at our house. I told her straight out that I had no intention of living with someone who disrespected our marriage. She didn't like that response at all. "I thought we could figure this out," she replied, as if we were having a little argument over which color to paint the kitchen. I just looked at her and said, "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She burst into tears and told me how everyone in our social circle was ignoring her. None of my friends' spouses spoke to her anymore. These were women who used to be her best pals. They'd go shopping together, take spa days, and organize dinner parties. They wanted nothing to do with her. All those lavish parties she enjoyed, nobody invited her anymore. It turns out that being known as the wife who started her marriage while her spouse was deployed has a negative impact on your social status. "What do you want then?" she inquired through tears. I just answered, "You'll find out soon enough." She looked concerned and added, "You met someone, right? You love her, don't you? Are you seeing her?" I couldn't help but laugh. She was the one who wanted to see other people, but suddenly she was jealous of the idea of me with someone else. She continued to beg for answers, but I had had enough. I just cried, "Get out." And she went, claiming I'd regret betraying her trust. The irony of the sentence: my lawyer had already prepared the divorce paperwork. I planned to have her served once I returned to see so she wouldn't come crying into my apartment again. She wanted to open things up? Fine. I was about to initiate divorce proceedings. My attorney served her on the day I left the shore. She contacted me in a frenzy, shouting about how I had betrayed her and left her broken, as if she were the victim in all of this. Then she called my lawyer and said she would fight the divorce until the end and would not let me go, as if she had a choice in the matter. She also tried to play the victim role with my parents, calling them and wailing about how I had taken her by surprise and how she had no idea what was coming. That backfired very quickly. They already knew everything and told her just how they felt about her behavior. They promptly blocked her number. Then her mother called me. Sharon has been telling everyone that we had agreed to open our marriage. She had convinced her entire family that this was a mutual decision. Her mother said they felt it was strange but assumed it was our personal choice. I shut that down quickly. No way. I already told your other daughter the truth months ago. I was never on board with this filthy idea of hers. Her mother began talking about how Sharon's mental health was deteriorating because everyone had cut her off. All those beautiful gatherings she used to like going to? Nobody invites her anymore. The other officers' wives refuse to speak to her. Her mother truly expected me to feel horrible about this. I thought to myself, why would my friends keep inviting her when she's not even my wife anymore? "Is there any chance you could work things out?" her mother inquired. I chuckled and replied, "Not at all. I can't be the husband of a woman who has kept her legs open for tourists for the last year. Who knows what kind of dirt has gone in there?" It was harsh, but I wanted them to know how I felt about their lovely daughter's behavior. Sharon's mother indicated she wasn't ready for divorce. I was upfront with her. The longer she fights this, the worse it'll be for her. I'm moving forward with my life whether she likes it or not, so she better cooperate for her own sake. Sharon has now bombarded my phone with texts and voicemails. She begs, pleads, and promises to change, stating she will do anything to make things right. I have not blocked her yet. Perhaps this is selfish, but I want her to see exactly what she tossed away. I'll block her eventually, but for the time being, I'm letting her suffer as much as I did when she sprung her open marriage on me. Update 2. Here's the latest update. I'm enjoying a shore break again. Divorce procedures are underway, and Sharon has been fighting hard against them, not because she wants to heal things, but because her perfect little plan is unraveling. However, she is now absolutely broke. That shiny new world of freedom she desired so much? It turns out it wasn't as glamorous as she imagined. All those guys she was going out with, they merely wanted to have fun with a married woman. They all left when the money ran out. She literally burst into tears in front of the magistrate and stated that opening the marriage was a mistake. She now wishes she could simply rewind the past year and have everything return to normal. After I denied her access to our joint account, she depleted her funds in an attempt to maintain her lifestyle. Within a year, she'd gotten through everything. Her teacher's paycheck barely covers rent now, let alone the fashionable outfits she's grown accustomed to. That's the problem about living large. Once you're acclimated to it, there's no turning back. When she first disclosed the marriage and I withdrew my money, she assumed it was only temporary. She assumed she could rely on her savings until I came to my senses and began subsidizing her lifestyle. That was her wonderful plan. Be a faithful wife during my breaks and then go crazy while I'm overseas. Her strategy failed miserably. She begs for another opportunity at each court session, saying, "Let's start over." It's easy for her to say. She wasn't the only one who had to deal with shame and trauma. Do you know what truly gets me? She purposefully dropped the open marriage notion just before my deployment began, leaving herself 6 months to do anything she wanted before I returned. Those first months at sea were terrible. You're stuck out there with nothing but the ocean around you, no distractions, just staring at the water and thinking about what's going on at home. Sometimes the dark thoughts are really unpleasant. I can't express how difficult it was to keep myself together. Anyway, the divorce is virtually complete. Just one more court date. Even though she is dissatisfied, the asset distribution has been settled and is fair. I'm selling my house. I can't bear the thought of remaining in a place where she wrecked our marriage. She can't buy me out since she can't afford half the price. That's fine with me. I don't want to cling on to anything from that existence. I truly enjoy my new life. I'm doing better than ever. I've met new people, established a strong routine, and feel free to live my life the way I want. I am not bitter about what happened. Honestly, I'm glad I didn't let her decisions ruin my future. I'm not looking to date right now, but I'm open to anything that comes along. I've blocked Sharon on all of my social media sites, but she keeps creating new profiles to stalk me. I can see them easily, but I let her look. Let her know exactly what she gave up. Her Instagram used to be all about extravagant parties, exotic travels, and beach photos. Now it's only melancholy statements about regret and second chances. I suppose that's what happens when you mess up a good thing.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
Now to the next story 7. I got fired after insulting the owner's disabled daughter. Although my work performance has been praised, my boss decided I wasn't a good fit. This happened on Friday. I've been drowning my sorrows all weekend, dreading the fact I have to start looking for a new job. Explaining why I got fired from my old job is going to be fun. I'm typing it up here to try and organize my thoughts in my head, because right now, it's all a mess. I had been with the company for 3 months and was still on orientation. My job was sales/advertising. As the new guy, I was given existing accounts to manage, which consisted of providing customer service and convincing my clients to spend more money on advertising. All of these accounts already had their ad campaigns done, and if they wanted something new, the account was transferred to a senior account manager who would work with our advertising guys to put something together for the customer. Eventually, I hoped to have that job, but I had to pay my dues by proving I could maintain existing accounts and convince them to spend more money first. Everything was going great, until last week, when we were scheduled to have our quarterly retreat. Since we were the main regional office in the area, all of the employees from the satellite locations came to our office for the retreat. The owner of the company rarely visits our office. He's been overseeing the setup of a new satellite office for the last year, according to my coworkers. But he was there for the retreat, as was his disabled daughter Amy. Not her real name, for the sake of privacy. One of my coworkers told me Amy works at one of the satellite offices and I probably wouldn't have much interaction with her, but I should be nice. That seemed like a no-brainer. I'm nice to everyone, regardless. I won't claim to be an expert on Amy's disability, but it seemed like she had childlike mannerisms and struggled with expressing herself. She also had some problems with motor skills. I'll describe the only interaction I had with her prior to the incident. I went to refill my coffee and Amy was in front of me, getting her coffee. I watched her struggle with getting condiments added and putting the lid on, so I politely asked if she needed any help. She thanked me, said she did, and let me finish making it. While I was making it, she said she hated coffee, but her dad made her drink it because she had to, in a loud voice, always alert. I smiled, said that was definitely important, and handed her the cup. She thanked me again and went back to the office her dad was using, where she had been most of the day. I felt like I had been a good Samaritan and went on my way. Most of the retreat is team-building exercises. Prior to the incident, Amy only participated in the puzzle race, where groups put puzzles together without the box art to see which team could finish faster. Amy wasn't in my group, so I didn't have any interaction with her there. Neither of our teams won. The big event, and the one that everyone seemed the most excited for, was the last activity of the day. Our boss gave us a list of potential clients. We were supposed to select 3 as a group, and put together something to attract the customer. We were told we would be judged on our creativity. My group explained that we could do pictures, slogans, jingles, whatever we wanted. Each person expected to work on one individually, then work with their group to polish it up before it was presented to everyone. It was kind of a big deal because at previous retreats, there would be clients on the list the owner was already close to bringing on board, and if you impress the owner, you might just land that account. I went with a jingle, rhymed a few words, and recorded it. It was silly but fit the brand. My group gave me some pointers, we made some improvements, and I recorded the final product for submission. I helped my team with their projects until it was time to turn everything in. After everything was turned in, we gathered in the big conference room to critique each other. The owner went through them one by one. If it was a picture or storyboard, he'd put it up, read it, and we'd make comments. Good or bad. There were some that were great which drew a lot of compliments, and some that were really bad, which we laughed about as a group. You could tell the senior account managers didn't care much about the exercise or put much effort into their pitches. Nobody seemed to get upset or offended, regardless of the feedback. When my jingle was played, it got a lot of comments, not all of them good, and I took the feedback with a smile. After getting my feedback, I felt a little more comfortable about sharing my thoughts on other presentations. I gave what I thought was valuable feedback to a few products, laughed at a couple others, and then a rather crude drawing was put up for the exact same company I had chosen. I immediately joked that, well, at least my jingle was better than that. Did a 3-year-old draw it? And laughed, to absolute silence. I was really confused because plenty of people had made jokes and everyone laughed. Instead, a few people looked at me like I was disgusting and the owner said, well, if you don't have anything nice to say, keep it to yourself maybe? Then my boss scooted down to where I was sitting and told me I needed to go to my desk. Now, I noticed as I was gathering my things that the owner's daughter was red-faced and starting to tear up. The team building exercise was over for me. I went back to my desk and it began to sink in that the drawing must have been drawn by the owner's daughter. There was no warning or anything. The owner didn't reveal who put together what we were looking at until after a few critiques. Maybe I should have known. Everyone was joking and having fun up to that point. Someone else had a pretty bad drawing that got laughed at. Either way, I felt awful. As soon as the event was over, I approached my boss to apologize. He told me to wait for him in his office. Long story short, I was fired. My boss said since I was still on orientation, he had decided I wasn't a good fit for the company, so it was better to let me go now. He didn't outright say I was being fired for making fun of her drawing, but that's literally the only thing that I've ever gotten in trouble for. My work, up until that point, had been praised. I didn't get much time to process it because my boss had already called security, who showed up fairly quickly, and escorted me to my desk to gather my things before escorting me out of the building. An hour later, I got a call from one of my former teammates, who asked if I wanted to join the team for a drink one last time. They needed it after the retreat, and felt bad that they didn't warn me. I wasn't feeling up for it, but I wanted to try and make sense of the whole situation, so I went to the bar. In the back of my mind, I was thinking that since I'm about to start looking for a new job, a few references from former coworkers wouldn't be bad since I definitely won't be getting one from my boss or the owner of the company after everything that happened. The team explained that Amy comes to all of these retreats, and she always does some crude drawing like that. Everyone just sort of knows to say nice things about it and move on. One of my teammates said that once you've seen one of her drawings, you know what to look for. Well, I didn't, and nobody warned me. I started to get pretty upset that this was a known thing and everyone knew but me, but what could I do? I had already fucked up and it cost me my job. The team also shared more about Amy. Apparently she works at one of the satellite offices but doesn't really do anything. The people in charge of the office try to come up with stuff for her to do because she gets upset when she's bored. The team said the way the people who worked there described it, they were basically her babysitter so she wouldn't bother her dad all day when he spent most of his time there, and after he moved on to establish the new satellite office, he didn't take Amy with him because she liked all the friends she had at that office. They also said that her dad had harassed a few single guys at the office to take her on dates, which seemed pretty damn HR inappropriate. But he does own the company. My team said Amy desperately wants a boyfriend and wants to get married, which she talks about all the time. The consensus seemed to be that there's no way she actually understands how relationships or marriage works, and her dad probably put this idea in her head to begin with. One of my teammates joked that it wasn't a bad deal, because whoever married her would inherit the company since she is the old man's only kid. I wasn't really in the mood for jokes at that point after losing my job over one, so I told them I needed to go. The only good thing is my former team members did say they would gladly give me a reference if I needed it, since they felt so bad about not telling me about the Amy situation to begin with. Oh, and the cherry on top? Amy sent me a Facebook friend request over the weekend. I haven't accepted it. I already upset her and it cost me my job. Part of me wants to accept it, apologize, and block her, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that either. I'm going to take a few days to get myself together and then get my resume out there. Edit. After reading all of the replies, including quite a few DMs, and talking with a close friend, I've decided that I'm going to accept the friend request. I'll do an update if there's any sort of conversation. I plan to open with an apology. If she replies, great. If she doesn't, then at least I will have a clear conscience knowing I've done the right thing. Update. If you saw my first post, you know that I got fired because I accidentally made a joke at the expense of the company owner's disabled daughter Amy. During the last team building event of the day, we were pitching ideas for accounts, which included everything from jingles, my pitch, to storyboards to slogans to drawings. A lot of senior account managers were phoning it in, and people were making jokes about their work, which had a lot of people laughing. I got some jokes about my pitch, and got a little overconfident, so when a crude drawing went up for the same account I did my jingle for, I made a joke about it. The joke was, well, at least my jingle was better than that. Did a 3-year-old draw it? My joke was met with stone-cold silence, and a very negative reaction from the owner of the company. What my coworkers had failed to tell me was that Amy usually submits a crude drawing, which is a lot of work for her due to her issues, and everyone knows to say a few nice things and move on. I was new and wasn't informed, so my ignorance and inappropriate response cost me my job. After meeting with my team at a bar to begin the process of drowning my sorrows, I got a friend request from Amy on Facebook. That brings us to the update. First of all, thank you to everyone who made me laugh. The first time someone joked about me accepting the friend request, marrying Amy, and taking my revenge by inheriting the company made me uncomfortable. By the third time I saw it mentioned, I couldn't help but laugh. A lot of you gave me good advice. I appreciate those who talked about legal action and what options I had. Unfortunately, I was still on orientation with my company, which is like a probationary period. During that time, they can let me go for any reason. They could fire me for wearing the wrong color socks if they wanted. I had to sign an agreement to get employed which stated I understood this. There's literally nothing I can do, legally. At the end of the day, I decided to go have some drinks with a good friend, talk things out, and see what he would do. Dave's been my best friend since we were in elementary school. We've probably spent more time together than some actual brothers. Dave was firmly on the side of accept the friend request, apologize, and clear your conscience, man. I'm getting us another round of shots. He knows me better than anyone, and he knows that the guilt would eat me alive. I posted it here because it bothered me. I decided to take his advice, and everyone here who pushed me for that as well, especially the ones that DM'd me. So, that's what I did. I accepted the friend request. I immediately messaged Amy. I said I shouldn't have made that joke about anyone's work, it was unprofessional, and I was sorry. It took her a while to respond, but when she finally did, she thanked me for my apology, but said she sent me the request because she wanted to apologize since I lost my job over it. I said she didn't owe me an apology, and there was another long pause before she asked if she could copy-paste something to me. I wasn't sure what it was, but said she could. She pasted a generic message, but one she had clearly spent some time on. I don't want to type it word for word, but I'll paraphrase. Hi, my name is Amy. Please forgive me if I'm slow to respond to you. I suffered a brain injury when I was a little girl and it takes me a while to type things out. There was more to it, but that's the basic stuff. I responded, saying it was not a problem and she could take all the time she needed. Amy and I ended up messaging back and forth until almost 3 a.m. No, we didn't fall in love, we aren't going on a date. I'm not going to marry her for revenge so I can take her dad's company. However, I do think I would like to be friends with her. Not because I feel bad for her, but because she's a genuinely nice person and honestly, everyone could use a few friends like that. We spent a lot of time talking about her. That's just the direction it went, so I asked questions since she seemed comfortable talking about it. Amy was in a car accident when she was a kid. She was in the car with her mom and they were hit by a drunk driver, coming back from a birthday party for one of her classmates. Her mom didn't make it, and Amy suffered a brain injury that impacted her motor skills. Because it makes it difficult for her to speak and do simple things like getting dressed, making coffee, etc., people assume she's mentally challenged. She was put in special ed because of it, but worked really hard and graduated from high school. She even wanted to go to college but her dad didn't think it was a good idea. Her life has been difficult because it's hard for her to communicate with people. By the time she can get a fully formed sentence out, the conversation is over. She can type, slowly, but most people don't want to type when they're face to face. She even admitted that when she's not at work, she will sometimes carry a tablet and pretend she's mute, because that's just easier. We eventually circled back to the drawing and my terrible response to it. She wasn't that offended by my response, because she assumed I didn't know. She got upset, primarily, because she knew all hell was about to break loose and she had no way to communicate with anyone. She was so upset when she found out I got fired, and tried to talk to her dad, but he wouldn't listen to her. She's fully aware that a lot of people at the company just pretend to be nice to her because she's the owner's daughter, but she does have a few friends at the satellite office where she works who better understand her disability. She gets frustrated because she can't truly contribute anything, but is happy when they are able to find busy work for her to do. It might take her all day to do something another person could do in a couple of hours, but it's better than sitting around bored all day. She knows she's a burden and a bother to her dad when he's around, but he's her dad and she loves him. She wishes every single day she was a daughter he could be proud of, rather than a burden. She tries talking to him via emails and text messages, but he usually doesn't respond. If they're in the same location, he'll just walk over and respond verbally, which is frustrating, because it becomes a one-sided discussion with her unable to do anything but give simple one-word answers like yes or no. She also thanked me again for helping with her coffee. She said that when she was younger, she tried to do everything by herself, and would get mad when people helped her, but now she's learned to appreciate the few who do. Most just stand there and look away, pretending to patiently wait for her to do it on her own. It was getting late for both of us at that point, really late. It takes her a long time to respond to messages. There's misspellings. I get why someone would assume she's mentally challenged. I myself referred to her in my first post as having childlike mannerisms, which was a misunderstanding on my part. When she tries to force words quickly or emphasize something, she gets really loud, which makes her sound like an excited toddler rather than an adult trying to have a conversation. We ended our talk last night agreeing to talk again sometime. She asked if I had watched the first episode of House of Dragon yet, which I have, and she asked if I'd like to talk about it after she watched it. I told her I'd love to. So that's it, that's the update. Sorry to those who expected me to steal her dad's company. I'm definitely not doing that. Talking to Amy did make me feel a lot better though. I don't know how I'm going to handle the whole firing thing at my next interview, but a few of you suggested I just leave a gap on my resume, and I may just do that. I doubt there will be any future updates, but at least this has a happier ending than my first post. TLDR, since a few asked for it in my first post, I lost my job, but I may have gained a friend. Comment by OPU/Flusterflux. Hey everyone, I am the original OP. Someone linked me to this, and I'm blown away by all the positive comments here. I guess I can give you a small update since so many people have read what I expected to be a throwaway confession post to help me organize my thoughts after having my life upended due to what I perceived as a joke, but was actually quite unprofessional on my part. As many have recommended, in my next job, I won't open my mouth unless I have something positive to say, regardless of what others are saying. That lesson is learned. So, on to the small update. I talked with Amy again last night. She loved House of Dragon. We talked about a few characters and Amy picked up some things I didn't pick up myself, so I'm gonna have to rewatch the first episode at some point. I wasn't really in the right headspace the first time I watched it anyway due to everything that happened.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.